Marie Antoinette was the Queen of France in 1789. She was the bride of King Louis the 8th, or is it the 7th? The King of France, the 6th. In that year, a revolt began in France in 1789, the French Revolution. Curious as to why her people are revolting, she asked, "Why are these people rioting?" And then someone replied. That person told her that her subjects did not have any bread. And so Marie Antoinette was surprised. If they don't have bread, well, this is what she said: let them eat cake. She couldn't imagine. If you don't have this, then eat that. So what happened? The subjects placed the royal family under arrest. Her trial began on 14th October 1793. And 2 days later, Marie Antoinette was convicted and she was executed by the guillotine. Welcome to Nahashon Kimemia Live. Thank you to all my 1,086 subscribers. Please subscribe to my channel and share these videos. Do not hide a light where there is darkness. So this is part 1, the Higher Education Loans Board. What is the history of this board? I took some material from Wycliffe Otieno. He wrote an article in 2004, and this is what he told us. I thought it is wise to remind us of where we came from, to know our roots. In 1952, the British colonial government, they came up with the Higher Education Loans Fund, HELF, Helb. The aim of that fund was to assist students to pursue university education outside of East Africa. So we had people going to Great Britain, we had people going to the USA, we had people going to India, we had people going to the USSR, we had people going to South Africa for higher education. And it was possible because of the Higher Education Loans Fund, set up by Her Majesty's government, represented in Kenya by the colonial government of Kenya. So that's our history. What happened after we gained independence? In 1963, the African government, the independence government under Kenyatta, the same people who had gone to the USA, USSR, South Africa and Great Britain, they stopped funding this body. And they said, you know what? The government will meet the cost of higher education. And the guys who recommended that were the Kenya Education Commission that was set up by that government. These are the same guys that recommended that churches should be taken out of schools and that the government should control schools. That's a topic for, I did that back in the day. So what did they want? They wanted to provide funds for educating people, right? But only for certain kinds of jobs. They wanted high-level human resource personnel. So they focused on white-collar jobs because they wanted to replace, as the white man was going away, they wanted to replace the black man in those positions, and to do that, the black man had to be educated. But there were only so few jobs, white-collar jobs, that the white man was leaving behind. And so many people were growing. The population was increasing highly. So eventually, there were too many white-collar jobs, right? And there were no jobs to help them. There were no technical skills emphasized at that level, at the university level, and people didn't have businesses. So we ended up with the university education churning up a lot of people, but no jobs, because all the white collar jobs that they were aiming for, they were gone. They were already filled up. So the government used these arguments, right, to justify expanding and subsidizing higher education. The argument that we're providing education for our people, this is a good thing. So they use that to expand themselves in the education sector. And how do you expand as a government? You subsidize. So university education, it became virtually free after 1963 because the government was bearing most of the costs. And guys were happy. But then something came about. Just 7 years after independence, Africa and the world experienced what we call the oil shocks of the 1970s. And it forced the government to rethink its policies on financing higher education. Now, economists, we call them shocks for a reason, because they wake you up from your stupidity. They wake you up from your illusion. Venezuela is currently experiencing a shock because it just discovered that oil is not enough to support an economy. And we experienced that shock in the 1970s. Nigeria, its dependence on oil, it might experience a shock in the near future. So what happened after we awakened from our illusion that free government services is the way to go, especially when it came to higher education? So the government went back to what the colonialists had introduced. They introduced a loan program in 1973. It was a reactivation of the 1952 program initiated by the colonialists. The program introduced was known as the University Students Loan Scheme. And we do this so many times. We introduce something that was there in the back, but we give it a new name. Universal healthcare, we're introducing it, the name is socialism. Manufacturing, the big four, we're introducing it, the name is import substitution. The handshake, we're introducing it, the name is a one-party state. Fuel tax, we're introducing it, the name is structural adjustment programs. We play about with the names, but the principle remains the same. And in this case, the principle was free stuff doesn't work. So the government had to go back. So a scheme was administered by the government, this scheme, the Higher University Students Loan Scheme. And it was under the Loan Disbursement and Recovery Unit in the Ministry of Education. So the Ministry of Education was guiding these policies. Was guiding this scheme. Now here's a funny thing, right? There is no guiding policies for this scheme. It was just goals. We want to do this, we want to do that. No policies, only 7 goals. And then there were no professionals in the loan disbursement and recovery, just educators. Can you imagine that? Running a financial scheme without financial personnel. But that is the government. So this is what happened. 3.1% of the Ministry Education budget in 1974 to 1975, it went to the University Loan Scheme, Students Loan Scheme. That figure rose to 6.1% in 1992 to 1993. It was the fastest growing component of university education according to Mungai, 1989. He wrote an article in 1989. So you can see that, yes, we started from a loan scheme. Then we moved into free stuff. After free stuff, we moved back to a loan scheme. But that loan scheme was increasing and there was no framework, there were no policies to guide it, just goals. A lot of the big four, a lot of these other policies, they're just goals. There are no proper schemes, and that's why they're not working. Even the constitution, it's goal oriented, but it doesn't work on the ground. But we'll talk about the Kenyan constitution later. So no precautionary measures were taken to guard against default. Why? Because there were educators that were handling this stuff, not people financially, people who are professionals in the financial sector. Of course, the staff lacked requisite skills in debt recovery. The beneficiaries, the people who are getting these funds from the University Students Loan Scheme, They were not educated on their obligations and the benefits of repaying what they were receiving. And that's a big deal. Some people might say, what's to be educated about? You got the loan, repay it. Education is important, and we'll see about that as we go. So the hurried implementation of this scheme, right, meant that it had no legal basis. The legal framework for it was nowhere. For example, there was a limitation of Actions Act. After 6 years, if you haven't recovered a debt, you haven't taken steps to recover debt, then that debt is gone. So they had to introduce new laws, right, so that to get this thing, to structure this thing, so that they can actually now start receiving cash, right, from the guys that are given cash. So when the program, this is an interesting part, right? When the program was introduced in 1974, students protested and rioted. Remember, they were used to free stuff, so they were protesting and rioting. Why? They were saying that you are forcing us to incur debts. And it makes a bit of sense, because they had seen in 1973 their friends didn't have that, but now they are being forced to take a loan instead of receiving free stuff. There was the removal of boon. It was kind of like pocket money. I think around 5,000 shillings, which was a lot of money back in the day. There were free meals, right, and everything. So the removal of the boon, it happened in the 1990s, and students rioted. Now they said, you are impoverishing us, because now we don't have pocket money, 5,000 bob. We don't have free meals. Where will we get these funds? Why? Because the system they introduced in 1974, it still had part of that free stuff. Remember, there were no protests or riots in 1963 when the government stopped funding the Higher Education Loans Fund set up by the colonialist Her Majesty's government. There were no riots at that time when they were removing a loan and introducing free stuff, because we naturally want free stuff. But there's one thing, free stuff doesn't work, and eventually we will wake up from our slumber. So they did wake up, and in 1995 they actually set up Helb now, completely taking away the free stuff. It's a loan, and it's a loan. So Helb broadened the program beyond public universities. Funny thing, right? After you take away the free stuff, then there's a broadening of the education sector. Loans were now accessible to post-secondary institutions, technical institutes, and all of those things, and they were also available to students in the private sector, education in the private sector. So you can see, after you take away the free stuff, right, and then you let the market work for itself, what happens? Guys get more access to this stuff. It's a lesson that perhaps as Africa we need to learn, and I hope that we'll learn that lesson.